The magic number is $3 million. That is the figure financial institutions now tell 20-somethings they will need to accumulate if they ever want to stop working. It is an abstract, almost comical number to someone entering a volatile modern job market. But while the youth look at that $3 million horizon with a mix of detachment and dread, a far more urgent, silent catastrophe is playing out right in front of us. It is happening to the people who did everything right. The people who are 55, 65, or even 74 today. They do not have 30 years left to let compound interest work its magic. They are out of time for decades. The social contract in America was explicit. You traded 40 years of sweat, loyalty, and tax dollars for a predictable exit strategy. Today, that strategy has evaporated. Across every city and suburb, millions of older Americans are waking up to a stark reality. Retirement is no longer a standard life stage. It has been reclassified as a luxury good. Look closely at the grocery store checkouts, the rideshare drivers operating at 2 a.m., or the retail greeters standing on arthritic knees. These are not people staying active for their health. These are casualties of a structural shift that quietly rewired the American economy while they were busy raising families and paying off mortgages. Recent data from the Employee Benefit Research Institute and AARP confirms the internal panic. Confidence in the traditional retirement model is not just slipping, it has cratered. A profound, systemic mismatch has formed between what it costs to stay alive and what the system actually pays out. The paradox is glaring. We live in an era of unprecedented corporate profits and staggering stock market highs. Yet the very generation that built the infrastructure for this wealth is financially stranded. They spent their adult lives contributing to retirement accounts, watching their paychecks shrink under deductions, and trusting that the finish line would remain where it was promised. Instead, they arrived at age 65 only to find the finish line had been dragged another 5 miles down the road. This is not a story about individual failure. It is not about a lack of discipline, or too many premium coffee purchases, or poor budgeting. That is the convenient lie told to shift blame. The reality is far more calculated. The rules of the game were rewritten mid-match, and the margin for financial error was systematically reduced to zero. Consider the modern retirement landscape. The average Social Security check hovers around $2,000 a month. In 1980, that might have secured a dignified, quiet life. Today, after accounting for skyrocketing property taxes, homeowners insurance, and a food supply chain that grows more expensive by the quarter, that check is spent before it even clears. And that is before you touch the true predator of older age, healthcare. The systemic trap is beautifully cruel. You can save diligently for 40 years, minimize your debt, downsize your life, and still be wiped out entirely by a single medical diagnosis or a few months in an assisted living facility. We are witnessing the emergence of a permanent working class of senior citizens. They are trapped in a geographic and economic vice. If they stop working, they lose their employer-sponsored insurance. If they rely solely on Medicare, the out-of-pocket gaps can consume half their income. So they delay. They stay in the office. They take part-time jobs. They consult. They trade their twilight years for basic survival capital. But how did we get here? How did a nation that pioneered the modern pension and championed the middle class transform aging into a terrifying financial risk? The answer does not lie in a sudden wave of national financial illiteracy. It lies in a deliberate, multi-decade corporate migration away from shared responsibility and toward absolute individual vulnerability. Somewhere between the late 1970s and the turn of the millennium, an entire economic foundation was dismantled by design, hidden behind the enticing illusion of personal choice. And right now, Generation X is about to hit that wall at full speed. To understand how the American retirement system collapsed, one must look back to 1978. That year, Congress passed the Revenue Act, which contained a minor overlooked provision known as Section 401. Originally intended by lawmakers as a tax loophole for high-earning corporate executives to shield their bonuses, it was never designed to replace corporate pensions. However, by 1981, the Internal Revenue Service issued rules that allowed employees to fund these accounts through payroll deductions. Corporate America quickly realized it could offload billions of dollars in long-term pension liabilities onto the balance sheets of individual workers. The structural shift from defined benefit plans to defined contribution plans happened rapidly. In 1980, roughly 38% of private sector workers had access to a traditional pension that guaranteed a monthly payout until death. By the mid-2020s, that number fell below 10%. Instead, the 401(k) became the standard mechanism for retirement security. This fundamental change transformed retirement from a corporate obligation into an individual investment challenge, shifting decades of market volatility, inflation risk, and investment management entirely onto the shoulders of everyday employees. This transition coincided with structural shifts in the broader American economy. Beginning in the early 1980s, corporate wages stagnated relative to productivity. Data from the Economic Policy Institute shows that while American productivity increased by nearly 60% between 1979 and 2024, hourly compensation for the average worker grew by less than 15% after adjusting for inflation. As real wages flatlined, workers found it increasingly difficult to allocate income toward 401(k) contributions while meeting immediate living costs. Simultaneously, the cost of core middle-class assets accelerated. The median sales price of a house in the United States in 1980 was approximately $64,000. By 2024, the median home price surged past $420,000, outstripping median household income growth by a wide margin. Higher housing costs forced workers to direct a larger percentage of their take-home pay toward mortgages and rent, leaving minimal surplus capital to invest in volatile financial markets. The geographic landscape of the United States created additional traps. Economic opportunities became heavily concentrated in major metropolitan areas, such as the Northeast Corridor, the West Coast, and major Texas cities. These regions offered jobs but demanded high costs of living. Workers who moved to these economic hubs faced high state and local taxes, expensive housing markets, and elevated childcare expenses. Moving away from these high-cost areas frequently meant taking a pay cut or leaving the job market entirely. Furthermore, the dot-com crash of 2000 and the Great Recession of 2008 caused significant financial disruptions. Generation X, born between 1965 and 1980, entered the workforce just as pensions were disappearing and faced major market crashes during their peak wealth-building years. The 2008 financial crisis destroyed trillions of dollars in retirement savings, wiped out home equity, and caused widespread layoffs. Many workers in their late 30s and 40s had to liquidate their remaining retirement accounts to pay mortgages, cover daily expenses, and manage long periods of unemployment, according to the Federal Reserve Board survey of consumer finances. The median retirement account balance for American households aged 55 to 64 stood at roughly $185,000 in the mid-2020s. For a worker retiring at age 65, an account balance of $185,000 yields less than $7,500 in annual income under standard financial withdrawal rules. This reality leaves millions of Americans almost entirely dependent on Social Security, a program originally designed in 1935 to serve as a safety net rather than a primary income source. The Social Security system itself faces structural imbalances. The program relies on a pay-as-you-go framework, where current workers pay taxes to fund current retirees. Demographics have inverted this structure. In 1960, there were approximately 5 workers for every 1 retiree. By 2026, that ratio has fallen to less than 3 workers per retiree. The Social Security Board of Trustees has repeatedly warned that the program's trust funds could be depleted within the next decade, which would trigger automatic benefit cuts if Congress does not implement legislative adjustments. The systemic pressure is amplified by the rise of the sandwich generation. Mid-career workers find themselves financially supporting adult children who are burdened by high student loans and expensive housing markets, while simultaneously funding the elder care needs of aging baby boomer parents. The cost of higher education increased by more than 150% between 1980 and the 2020s, forcing families to take on significant debt. When an aging parent requires assisted living or nursing care, the costs often fall on their adult children. Market shifts also altered corporate hiring behaviors. The widespread adoption of temporary contract labor and the gig economy stripped millions of workers of traditional workplace benefits, matching contributions, and health insurance. A worker operating as an independent contractor must fund their entire retirement account and pay self-employment taxes, which leaves little margin for savings. The transition from collective corporate security to individual financial management has created a dynamic where millions of Americans approach retirement age with insufficient assets to cover basic survival costs. The crisis has moved from statistical models into the daily operations of the American economy. Data released by the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics reveals that 19.1% of Americans aged 65 and older remain active in the labor force, a significant increase from 12.9% in 2000. This shifts the demographic makeup of the low-wage workforce, as elder workers fill roles in retail, logistics, and food service alongside individuals 50 years their junior. This workforce participation is driven not by personal choice, but by structural financial deficits. The mathematical model that once promised a stable retirement has collided with the modern pricing of food, shelter, and medical treatment. Bureau of Labor Statistics. The collision between federal policy and private markets is visible in the structural gap within the American healthcare system. While workers are told that Medicare will insulate them from health-related financial shocks after age 65, the reality is a multi-layered system of deductibles, premiums, and exclusions. The latest annual estimate from Fidelity Investments indicates that an average 65-year-old individual retiring needs approximately $172,500 in after-tax savings solely to cover out-of-pocket medical expenses during retirement. This figure completely excludes the cost of long-term care, dental work, and vision care. For a couple, the required medical reserve exceeds $345,000. When compared against the median household retirement balance of $185,000, the institutional gap becomes mathematically absolute. Goodoff Financial Group. This deficit creates a clash between public infrastructure and corporate realities. In the private sector, the widespread acquisition of regional healthcare networks and senior living facilities by private equity firms has driven up the cost of aging. The average annual cost of a private room in a skilled nursing facility has surpassed $110,000, while basic assisted living facilities average more than $70,000 annually. Because standard Medicare does not pay for prolonged custodial or long-term care, middle-class assets are systematically liquidated to cover these expenses. Families are forced into a process known as Medicaid spend-down, where they must deplete their entire life savings and sell ancestral property to qualify for state-level low-income medical assistance. Britannica. Simultaneously, older workers face systemic discrimination within the labor market itself. While macroeconomic pressures force seniors to prolong their working years, corporate hiring practices consistently favor younger, lower-cost labor. Human resource departments frequently use automated applicant tracking systems that filter out resumes showing more than 20 years of experience, effectively blocking older workers from high-wage corporate roles. When older workers are displaced by corporate restructurings, mergers, or artificial intelligence deployments, they are systematically down-leveled into the gig economy or seasonal contract positions. These roles lack employer-matching 401(n) provisions, paid sick leave, and comprehensive health insurance, which locks older workers into a cycle of structural underemployment. The financial pressure is further exacerbated by the mechanisms used to calculate federal benefit adjustments. The Social Security Administration determines the cost of living adjustment using the Consumer Price Index for urban wage earners and clerical workers. Economists note that this index fails to reflect the actual consumption patterns of older Americans, who allocate a vastly disproportionate share of their monthly income to healthcare and housing, rather than electronics, apparel, or transportation. While official inflation metrics may indicate moderate price stabilization, the microinflation affecting senior households continues to compound. Property taxes in states like Texas, New Jersey, and Illinois have risen, outstripping flat Social Security adjustments and turning paid-off homes into ongoing liabilities. This dynamic creates a legal and economic stalemate. On one side, federal agencies encourage workers to delay claiming Social Security benefits until age 70 to maximize their monthly payouts. On the other side, physical health realities and corporate downsizing make remaining in full-time employment impossible for millions of Americans in their 60s. Those who claim benefits early at age 62 face a permanent 30% reduction in their monthly payout, penalizing them for structural disruptions completely outside their control. The institutional response to this crisis has been structural paralysis. State governments face rising Medicaid burdens, while federal lawmakers defer structural reforms to Social Security and Medicare due to intense partisan polarization. Private employers continue to reduce their contributions to worker benefit plans to protect corporate margins against global competition. The outcome is an economic dead end, where the individual is held entirely responsible for navigating